We're here today with Dr. Goldenberg, who will be talking a bit about his research on men's health and prostate cancer in just a moment. My name is Fiona Chu. I'm a student librarian at Woodward Library, and I'm hosting the seminar along with Alan, who's a librarian from the Urban Cape Barber Center. The purpose of the Health Information Series is to foster better personal health management, and it's also a chance to share a variety of health topics based on the expertise and research that happens at UBC's Medical and Health Sciences programs. In collaboration with the UBC Woodward Library, the Urban Cape Barber Center has sponsored a lecture series where distinguished faculty members and scholars from UBC are given the chance to present health topics to urban and remote places across the province of British Columbia. Our scholars are chosen based on their academic work and specialization on issues pertaining to the healthcare needs of the province's communities. So with the help of the UBC Media Group, who uses new webcast technology called MediaSite, we're able to share the research of UBC's faculty members and scholars province-wide in a much more interactive manner. So today we've got a very special guest who will be sharing his research and providing us with some consumer health information on this topic and answering some of your questions as well. He is the director of the Vancouver Prostate Center and the head of the Department of Urologic Sciences at UBC. And he's also appointed as a member to the Order of Canada in 2009. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Larry Goldenberg.
Mic on okay? Thank you, Fiona and Alan, for inviting me, and it certainly is a privilege to speak to those of you in the room and all of those out in cyberspace around the communities of British Columbia and elsewhere. And I am not just addressing the men of our society, but the women as well, because men's health is really a family's health issue, and every woman has a father, a husband, a son, an uncle, brother, and so forth. So men's health really does encompass family health, and as I'll say later towards the end, it's sort of like the last piece of the puzzle of what we talk about in family health. And I'm not going to really delve into my research, but I'll be happy to answer any questions during the Q&A on any particular items that may be applying to prostate cancer research, which is the area that I've spent most of my career on. The Men's Health Initiative is a relatively new development. We rolled it out here in Vancouver about a year and a half ago. And there's been a lot of groundwork involved to develop the framework for the men's health programming that we're trying to get in place and identifying exactly what it is we want to do, what is the right initiative, what is the right strategy, both at a provincial and a national level. And working with the Public Health Agency of Canada and the Public Health Office of British Columbia, we're making progress and we're going to get there pretty soon. But we really want to aim at what the gaps are in our healthcare delivery system at all ages across the spectrum of men. And so I'm going to touch on this a little bit. And I think the first thing to say is that when you ask people what do they think about men's health, what comes to mind is prostate cancer. Remember Movember? Mustaches. Let's raise money for prostate cancer. And penile issues, particularly sexual dysfunction, all the ads on TV for Viagra and Cialis and so on. But men are really, believe it or not, more than a penis and a prostate. And if you look on the right side of the slide here, you can see that there are many issues, and this is just touching on some of them. Sure, that behavioral health, mental health, heart health, bone health, sexual health, and prostate, but there are other things too. Things you might not identify as men's health issues, fatherhood issues, the impact of a father or a lack of a father on a teenage boy developing, or on trauma in a child, issues of wife abuse, or husband abuse. These are all male health issues as well, though they don't pop into your mind as being in the forefront as male health. So it really has to be an all-encompassing approach, and we have to address all of these many areas of men's health and go beyond just prostate cancer and sexual dysfunction. And I'm going to touch on some of that a little later on as we move through the slide. But to put things into perspective, it's the old saying is men live on average 4.4 years less than women in our society in Canada. And if you look across the world, you can see the gap there in life expectancy. But remember, this is average life expectancy. So as those of you in mathematics know, average can be brought down if there's if there are a lot of events happening at one extent or one extreme, it'll bring down the average, or at the other extreme, bring up the average. So it's really the average life expectancy that's lower. So something is bringing down the average life expectancy across the world. In some parts of the world, up to 10 or 11 years of a gap between men and women. And so there's something beyond biology that is happening here, and we're going to look into that a little bit. Beyond life expectancy, we talk about health expectancy and potential years of life lost, which may reflect a little bit better the real problem, and are maybe a little bit more of a revealing statistic when it comes to talking about health in general. And if we look at health expectancy, on average there's about a 10-year gap between the time that a person dies and moving backwards to when he or she got sick. And that's the gap between life expectancy and health expectancy. So in an ideal world, we would be absolutely healthy until the minute we die. That would be a gap of 0. But that's not reality. It's not going to happen. We all get sick, and usually before we die, unless you get hit by a car or some other major trauma, which is a problem. And so really the overall goal when we think about what we should be doing from a public health point of view is to decrease that gap and try to make men and women live longer, healthier lives until the clock runs out, until their life expectancy. But as one research team has observed, there's this discrepancy between health and survival of the sexes. So men are physically stronger and have fewer disabilities, but have substantially higher mortality at all ages compared with women. And it's referred to as the male-female health survival paradox. So, why is that? So, what is men's health? And again, reiterating what I said earlier, right across the spectrum, basically from birth and even in utero all the way to death, there are areas that stand out as being prominent in men's health and on the male side of the spectrum. Some are purely gender domain specific: testicular cancer, prostate cancers, penile disorders. I mean, clearly that only happen in men. And there are others that happen in both, but seem to be either dominant on the male side or more with a poor prognosis on the male side, or not as well recognized. A good example would be osteoporosis, thinning of the bones. That is 1 in 4 women in postmenopausal years have osteoporosis, but 1 in 8 men do. So it's a predominant female, but it's an area of men's health that hasn't been recognized and properly addressed. And when a man comes into a hospital with a fractured hip from osteoporotic bones, he has a 4 times increased risk of dying than if a woman comes in. And that's still being investigated as well. At UBC, we have a great hip health program, and they're looking at problems like that. And you can look right across the spectrum. So, in the younger ages, we deal with autism being male prominent, learning disabilities, and so on. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have low testosterone, what we call hypogonadism, as well as bone issues, prostate cancer, benign growth of the prostate, and in general, lack of health-seeking behaviors. The World Health Organization in 2002 addressed gender equity. And they basically said that women and men are given equal opportunity to achieve their health potential. And we recognize that gender is a determinant of health. Okay? Being a man or being a woman does determine health outcomes. And it acknowledges here that there are different challenges to men and women in managing their health. And there are different barriers in accessing health. There are a couple of countries in the world that have already developed men's health formal policies, governmental policies. One is Ireland, the other one is Australia. Brazil is on the verge of legislating a men's health program, and that's it for the world. So why do we focus on men? Many of the risk factors, you can just read this as well as I can, which result in chronic illness, smoking, physical inactivity, poor diet, obesity, alcohol abuse, are higher in men than in women. Education for men on health issues is needed. This ties in very tightly with what the Ike Barber Learning Center is doing, trying to get messaging out, reaching out to educate people on a variety of healthcare topics out in our community, and this is just one of them. Men are less likely to visit healthcare practitioners. When a teenage boy moves into adulthood, he's interested in college, he's interested in his job, family, so forth. Very low on his priority list is going to a doctor, unless there's a problem. A young woman going into adulthood has to see the doctor for birth control pills, other reproductive issues, and so they're more likely to just be in the healthcare system and be exposed to the public health policy issues and so on. Men don't get exposed to it. So we, as I'll mention later, we have to reach out and get men to address these issues. And that's a big, big problem in men's health. And men's health issues have a greater financial burden on our socioeconomic systems: late treatment costs, longer years of illness, loss from the workforce, negative impact on children, and so on. So I think there's a need to focus on men. And what we've developed here in British Columbia is the Men's Health Initiative for British Columbia, which is basically a branding. It's an organization that's trying to bring together all of these areas of excellence. I call it connecting the dots, and I'll address the dots in a bit. Single point of contact, just a brand, Men's Health. We actually have something called Men's Health that is looking at helping all the other organizations that are addressing men's health issues, whether it's prostate cancer research, whether it's fatherhood issues or whatever, come together and know that they can be part of this brand called Men's Health, and hopefully we'll be able to attract sponsorship and government funding and so on to help people with the work that they're trying to do. One of the first things that we did in our research was to actually do a white and gray literature search and to develop this roadmap. And you can see the roadmap on our website. The website is called aboutmen.ca. If you go there, you can download this, the PDF version. And if you got nothing else to do, it's a good read, actually, and it really addresses, and I'll just highlight a couple of the features of it. But, you know, we talk about this four and a half year life differential, life expectancy differential between men and women, and, you know, how do we make sense of it? It's really a mystery. And so we need to look at the sources of this discrepancy, and we've got to find out what it is that's going to do it. So in this roadmap, we developed a framework for making sense of the field of men's health, to try to highlight some of these issues that have to be taken into account when we look at, you know, the differences between sex or gender in health status. And so it's like a population-level murder mystery, really. And we look at it in the framework of male-specific conditions, which I mentioned, male risk conditions, where just being a male puts you at risk. For example, suicide, motor vehicle accidents, HIV. And developed, you know, we looked at all of the white and gray literature, the academic and gray literature, and we came up with these recommendations to try to address, you know, how should us as researchers, how should governments, how do we address these issues? And the framework is, you know, we look at male health from a biological point of view, hormones, brain structure, other physical differences. You know, men are wired differently than women, and that's just the way it is. We are physically different, and because of that, we do take on riskier jobs. You don't see a lot of women, you know, forestry workers or women firemen, or there are some, but by far the majority are male, just because of our physical characteristics, our ability to do these things that our society needs. So it has to be done. We need policemen, we need firemen, we need you know, forestry workers and so on. So men take on these jobs, so it's environmentally more dangerous. And then there's behavioral factors, and the bottom, you know, the bottom one, their traditional masculine role. There's a lot of research going on at UBC, particularly in the Faculty of Nursing, looking at masculinity. And I think it's really terrific work that needs to be supported. And again, this is the kind of work that we want to support through a bigger initiative. That quote at the top there is, I think, very telling. Having a Y chromosome should not be seen as possessing a self-destruct mechanism. You know, it's not your excuse for going out and driving crazy. You know, you have to be, but on the other hand, you can't blame the victim. We have to value the positive male traits. So being a male, looking at the trait, the ability to make decisions about your health, you know, and we have to be cautious in referring to traditional, or what's called hegemonious masculinity, as the cause of males' poor health behaviors. So there's a lot of science in that area. And when we look at the potential years of life lost, which will account for that difference in life expectancy, men are dying at earlier ages for a number of reasons, but the top ones are cardiovascular disease, suicide, and motor vehicle accidents. And because men are dying at a younger age, you can see on the curve here, sorry about that. Oh, Air Canada is flying. There we go. The blue is men, the red is women. You can see even in the 30s to 40s, the two curves about this, referring to the number of deaths per 100,000 population, are starting to diverge. So women do die of cardiovascular disease, no question, and it's a big killer of women in the older age groups, into the 50s, 60s. But it's this difference here, this gap in the 30s and 40s, that brings down the life expectancy of men. So we have to address, why is it that men, when they get a heart attack at age 40, they die of it, whereas a woman who gets a heart attack at age 40 seems to be able to survive it better. So there are factors there, and there's cardiac research going into it. Look at the gap here in suicide between men and women. It's scary, that blue line and compared to the red line. Women do commit suicide, but the number is 4 times for men. And it seems to be happening in the 30 to 50 range, settles down, and then there's an increase again in the 80s. Why is this happening? It needs study, it needs research, it needs to be addressed. And the third important one that we identified is motor vehicle accidents. Again, women do die. You see the red line. Women are dying of motor vehicle accidents. So women do drive carelessly as well. But there's a huge gap between men. And that gap, again, accounts for the decrease in life expectancy. And there are clearly societal consequences of these issues. Close to 50% of women are widowed by age 65. And over 50% of elderly widows living in poverty were not poor before the deaths of their husbands. And at age 95, women outnumber men 8 to 1, which is okay for the one guy, I suppose, but gets pretty lonely for a lot of those women. So once again, coming back to our Men's Health Initiative BC, I wanted to talk in the last couple of minutes of my talk here about what do I mean about connecting the dots. And this is really my goal here in developing this Men's Health Initiative, because I or UBC or VGH or this Men's Health, we can't do it all as one. And we recognize that there are foci of excellence, whether it's in the nursing school or whether it's in Prince George. There are foci of excellence across our province of people, researchers, educators, investigators of all sorts, healthcare workers, social workers, you name it, addressing areas that are of impact in men's health. And we want to try to bring it all together. So the foci of excellence and bringing them together with some sort of synergy and a partnership will allow us to, for the sum of the whole, far exceed the individual parts, whether it be bringing together people. For example, a good example is fatherhood. When we rolled out the Men's Health, I got 4 different phone calls from groups around the province who are involved in fatherhood research, ranging from Children's Hospital in Vancouver to a school in Victoria where an individual social worker working in the school was investigating on her own time the linkages between fatherhood or lack of fatherhood behavior and how the young boys are studying in school. So we managed to put them all together under the one context of fatherhood, and now there's a Fatherhood BC group. The other dots are education, prevention, early diagnosis, and future health outcomes. And I think we need to capture the interests of men and of health professionals and research, media, and so on, to pay attention to the fact that men have individual and unique vulnerabilities, and if we can educate them that they're at risk, so we have to do risk assessment or teach people how to self-risk assess. There aren't enough family doctors in this province for every man to go in and have an extended visit with a family doctor to go over all the risk factors. But just about everybody has access to a computer, so we can get that online and people can get risk assessments, and we're developing the tools to do that, so that they can talk about prevention. They can talk about early diagnosis and future health outcomes. So these are all, again, connecting the dots of education, risk assessment, early diagnosis, prevention, and outcomes. The next dots are the multiple male health issues, and we have linkages between all of these social determinants, be it education or your workplace or you're employed or not employed, the diet, your activity, your families, and so forth, and how those impact on males across all age groups. And really interesting are what we're learning now about linkages between certain illnesses and certain other outcomes. And a good example of one is cardiometabolic disease, obesity, diabetes or insulin resistance, high blood pressure and high lipids, and the linkage that has to sexual dysfunction. And that's one way to get the attention of the male. To tell a man that if he doesn't lose weight and he becomes diabetic, he's going to lose his sexual functioning. He may be more interested in that than saying to him, if you don't be careful, if you're diabetic out of control, you might lose a toe from gangrene. Okay? Tell him he's going to lose his sexual functioning, you might catch his attention a little bit more. Same with smoking. Smoking leads to sexual dysfunction, not just lung cancer. And if I go to a 20-year-old and I say, stop smoking because you're going to develop lung cancer or bladder cancer one day, they'll just look at me and go, I'm an invincible 20-year-old. nothing's going to happen to me. And that's for old people, like 50-year-olds. Okay? But if you say to him, if you keep smoking, you're going to have sexual problems, that you can use the colloquialisms. It's going to happen to you when you're 30, 35, might catch his attention. And there's other linkages between testosterone and depression, testosterone sexual functioning, bone health. Low testosterone can lead to bone fragility and so on. So we're connecting the dots scientifically and medically between all these areas. We have different regions that can be thought of as dots that we have to identify, particularly in our province. And we have regions within the city, and we have regions across the province. So, I have to link to the Native community, the Native health clinics in downtown East Side, and we're working with them to address a lot of the issues of the poor and troubled men of downtown society, and across the province. Within the healthcare sector, we have to connect acute, chronic care and community care. And finally, all the other groups. So I mentioned earlier that male health cannot be in isolation. We have to think about male health in partnership with women's health, children's health, and minority health. And if we don't address the whole picture, we're really not going to serve any of them fully. So just a couple of points on how do we reach these audiences, and we have two big audiences. We got the 18 to 40, 18 to 35-year-old male, and many of you out there have sons and who are probably in that age group and wishing that they would pay some attention to their health. Something as simple as taking 20 minutes to speak to your father or to your grandfather while they're alive about your family health. What did grandfather die of, or what am I, do I have prostate cancer in my family? Do I have colon cancer? Do I have heart disease in my family? Something as simple as that. To have an understanding of what the consequences of undiagnosed blood pressure, high blood pressure are. So communications, we have somebody from education here. Educating and communicating is tough to that group. We're trying to do it through digital media. We're trying to do it through websites. This is a website called aboutmen.ca. It's pretty well populated now with educational material, but it's dry. It's boring if you're a 20-year-old. You can get an answer to a question if you search it, but it's not exactly reading. This might be a little more interesting. It's got video clips that were created by the Digital Media School here at VGH, UBC, SFU, Emily Carr. There's a digital school, and there are 6 young men, well, 5 young men and 1 young woman who got together and spent 6 months putting together a website called manupcanada.ca. And if you go there and you look at the videos, I'd love to get feedback from you. We've had soft launches of this. We're about to hard launch it. We're developing sponsorships with the Vancouver Canucks, the Whitecaps, the Giants, the Lions, sports teams. And we're also, that's how we're going to reach that demographic, through that. And then the other group are the over 40s. They're a little different. I like to think of the younger people as needing preventative maintenance and the older people as needing repairs. Okay, they've got brushes with mortality. They already have their blood pressure problems. They're developing diabetes. They're obese. They haven't been exercising in years. And so we have preventative strategies, and we got to get the messaging out. A little bit easier to get the messaging out to 40 plus because they're already concerned about their health. And ultimately, we want to decrease that gap, as I mentioned, between life expectancy and health expectancy. Add 10 healthy years to the middle of your life. And the last piece of the puzzle being men's health. So again, it's a global issue. It's the current issue. I think UBC is right at the cutting edge. I think the development of a men's health initiative, bringing all the resource together that we have, will attract both provincial and federal attention. And this is going to be something that will only grow over the next 5 to 10 years. So to everyone who's supported us, I thank you for your support. We're certainly looking for more support. And I didn't delve into anything on any particular detail, but I'm happy to answer questions that have anything to do, particularly with my field of interest, which is prostate cancer, or the men's health program in general. Okay, so thanks very much. So any questions on
Larry,
that?
if anyone has any questions. Okay, so Larry, well, we'll bring that to the audience.
I was hoping if you could
touch on some of the research that you're doing right now with the prostate clinic and your urology science department?
Well, that's a very big question. We have 6 programs in urology, and they all have strong research programs. Our strongest research program is the prostate cancer research, and we cover everything in there from diagnostic research right through to the treatment paradigm of advanced prostate cancer. And in between, we look at, we've been studying robotics for radical prostatectomy, new techniques for surgery over the years. We've been working with the Cancer Agency looking at radiation therapy approaches. We're primarily, though, dealing at the basic science level with why does prostate cancer kill in the most advanced stages? And can we reverse it? Can we turn prostate cancer from a deadly disease in some men? It's not deadly in every man, okay, but it is deadly in some. And can we identify what it is about those men, about their disease, and try to reverse it so that it becomes a chronic disease, or even one day be able to cure it? And on the diagnostic side, we're investigating new MRI technology here at UBC, as well at VGH, to try to see if we can identify prostate cancer more accurately and predict how in one given individual prostate cancer behaves. So that's a very quick overview of what we're doing in prostate. We're also in the department, we have a very strong kidney stone research team. We're doing technology research with robotics in partnership here with the Faculty of Sciences and Engineering and Computer Science. In fact, we got a large CFI, and we actually have 2 research robots now, in addition to the 1 robot that is used clinically. And we're only one of 3 groups in the entire world that has the program that we have in partnership with the company that actually makes the robots. So we're a pretty good company there. We have a bladder care center here that looks at things like urinary issues, voiding disorders, and doing research in ways of diagnosing voiding disorders without having to be go through painful procedures, so minimally invasive procedures. And the male health program. We have a strong research initiative going on. Yes, ma'am. Sir.
I'm interested in this recent research on prostate cancer, and could you give your quick assessment of, let's say, some of the research that's done here at UBC and Prostate Center, OGX-011 and MDB-3100 and abiraterone? Could you sort of comment on the context of what's been done over the last 20 years and how important these 3?
So as I was alluding to, not all prostate cancer will lead to a man's death, but in quite a significant, about 45,000 men a year die of prostate cancer in North America. So there's still a lot of men who die of it, and they die of it because their disease becomes what we call castration resistant. In the advanced stages of prostate cancer, when it's spread outside of the prostate to other parts of the body, say to the bones or the lymph nodes, then it's what we call systemic disease. It's outside of the prostate. It's now growing. It's set up shop somewhere else in a bone. And if it grows in the bone, it can break the bone or it can cause pain. And then it'll go to another bone. It'll go different parts. And eventually it overwhelms the body and the individual dies. That's how cancer kills, when it spreads and basically takes over the body. So what we know now, we learned probably 100 years ago, was that prostate cancer is linked somehow to testosterone, which is the male hormone that's made in the testicles. And it's sort of like the fuel sorry, leave my phone off there. It's the fuel that feeds the fire. And so if you remove that fuel from the body, if you block the hormone, then the cancer will shrink down. It won't die. It'll shrink down to a basic state of a few cells that are going to a dormant state, but eventually learn how to grow again without the hormone. Okay? And that's when it becomes, we used to call it hormone refractory, hormone resistance. It's now called castration resistance. So these drugs that you mentioned all act in the very advanced stages. So OGX-011 is a product of our lab, and it's what we call an anti-clusterin drug. Clusterin is a protein made by many parts of the body, and it's sort of like a self-defense mechanism. So a cancer upregulates or turns on the production of this protein. It's sort of like the cancer cell is building walls around itself, okay, made of this clusterin. so it can't be killed by normal drugs, or it just survives and it lives happily. And so we identified that. Dr. Gleave is the principal investigator of that, and he's identified a way of reversing that, or actually blocking it, the production. So it tells cancer cells, turn off the production of the self-defense mechanism. So then the cell dies, because it has no more self-defense. So it gets killed by the immune system, or it gets killed by a drug or whatever. And so it's been now entering into what's called phase 3 studies, which are advanced research. And hopefully within 2 to 3 years, so far all the research has been very promising, and it's going to be hopefully a blockbuster drug that came out of Vancouver. And all the men in Vancouver who have been part of our clinical trials have done pretty well with it. Though it's not the be-all and end-all. We're not curing, we're extending life, we're not curing yet. Cancer cells are very clever. They figure out ways around all kinds of treatments. The other drugs you mentioned, abiraterone and MDV-3100, are, let's call them super-duper hormone drugs. Okay? Again, out of our lab, we were able to identify that the cancer cell, even after you've castrated a man, I don't like using that term, but removing the testosterone from the body, you haven't removed all of it. The cancer cells actually have a way of producing their own testosterone. Okay? And it's called a backdoor pathway. It's got to do with sort of certain enzymes that are still active. So abiraterone blocks one of those enzymes so that the cell can't make its own testosterone. So it can't make its own fuel anymore. And it's extending life. And the early research is looking very promising. And the company is hoping to, it's being marketed by a company called Janssen, a branch of J&J. And they're hoping to have that out on the market probably by year end. Okay, approved by Health Canada. The other drug is still in studies. It's called MVI-3100. It's out of a company out of New York, and it's a real super hormone blocker. It blocks all hormones at the cancer cell level. I don't know if you're familiar with a drug called Casodex. If you're in the field, you know that. It's sort of like a super Casodex. And so those are three big. You're clearly familiar with that field, and those are the three big drugs right out there right now. And at BC, we've been involved in research every one of those. One of them is our own drug. One of them is based on our research, and then we've participated in the clinical trials in the other to try to offer that to our patients. That was a long answer, sorry. It took a lot of time. Anything online? Any questions online? Yes?
Are you concerned about the pesticides and hormones in our food in regards to...
What was the first word? The which?
The pesticides and hormones that are in our food.
You know, pesticides are nasty. You've heard of Agent Orange from the Vietnam years? It's been proven pretty much now without any doubt that Agent Orange has increased the risk of prostate cancer in all those soldiers who are exposed to it. So there are things in our environment that are clearly bad for you. You know, whether it's the pesticides that are used on vegetables and fruits, you know, they're pretty mild in comparison to Agent Orange. And whether or not they actually can accumulate in the body and cause problems, I'm not sure. Environmental research is out there. It's being done. We've actually have one scientist, Dr. Nelson, who is doing a fair bit of work looking at different amines and other biologicals out there that may have an impact on cancer cells. Probably through the hormonal axis in the body. It probably, you know, adjusts the way your body makes different steroids, be it cortisones or hormones, sex hormones or whatever. And different ratio of sex hormones in the body may impact on how cells work or how cells thrive or not thrive or turn into cancers. But yeah, it's a big field, wide open. Absolutely. What was the other? You said pesticides and something else?
And hormones. Hormones,
Yeah.
and
Well, hormones, like if you take steroids for muscles?
the hormones that are in our meat.
Oh, yeah, well, there's definitely hormones in the meat. That's, I think, why we're seeing a lot taller kids today than we used to. So, but yeah, that's a whole area. It's not my field. I really shouldn't comment anymore on it. I'm not very familiar with that, but it's a good question. Yes, ma'am.
A couple of questions. First of all, thank you for your general overview about men's health. Good to be reminded. The other is the relationship of cholesterol and prostate cancer. I'm unclear about what that, do we know the mechanism? Is it a spurious association? Could you
So
elaborate?
there's an association. Whether there's a causation is another question. There's definitely an association. In fact, there's some research that suggests that statins, which lower cholesterol, may actually lower the incidence of prostate cancer and the progression of prostate cancer if you have it. And the probable mechanism is a hormonal one. All of the hormones that we have in our body, particularly the sex steroids like testosterone or estrogen, they eventually originate from cholesterol. Cholesterol is sort of like the building block for almost all hormones in the body. So theoretically, if you have too much cholesterol, you're going to get more hormones and a change again in the hormonal balances in the body, which may impact at the cellular level to promote a cancer developing, particularly one that is hormonally sensitive, like prostate cancer or breast cancer. Those are particularly two very common, cancers that are hormonally dependent.
And that leads to my second question. Having a cross-cultural interest myself, there are cultures that have very low incidence of cancers in general, virtually nil, compared to our own, and that brings in the lifestyle-related issues that this gentleman mentioned. Can you comment on that, and have we learned anything about prostate cancer specifically in terms of our understanding of other cultures, and of course that brings in diet?
That's a terrific question, and geography clearly plays a role. But what is it about geography? So for a good example in prostate cancer is an Asian male growing up and living in Asia has a much lower incidence of prostate cancer than his brother who is growing up in Vancouver. And so what's the difference? Genetically they're the same, or they come from the same background. The difference is environment and diet. And so there is research on environment. I don't know that much about it to comment, but certainly in diet there's been a lot of study of factors such as plant sterols, estrogen-like products in plants, soy products. So in Asia there's less red meat, more plant food, if you will, more soy-derived products. And those seem to be healthier than animal fats. If you eat a lot of red meat, particularly barbecued or roasted red meat or processed meats, the incidence of cancers just skyrockets. And you got prostate cancer and colon cancers, the two main ones in males, and breast cancer in females. So there's no question that there are products in those foods that somehow mutate the cells or stimulate the cells to mutate to become cancer cells. So we tell our patients who want to know about a healthy diet, for example, cut back drastically on the red meat, no processed meat, eat more of green leafy vegetables, and soy products are good for you, red tomatoes.
To support that those interventions are effective?
There's epidemiological data. There aren't any good hard studies, and you got to be careful what you read in the newspapers and the press releases, because it can change overnight. A good example of change is selenium. There was indirect evidence that selenium might decrease the incidence of prostate cancer. There was indirect evidence that vitamin E might decrease the incidence of prostate cancer. So a study was done of 17,000 men randomized to either selenium, vitamin E, both or neither. And they were monitored for years. And they found during the course of the study that there was an increased incidence of prostate cancer in the vitamin E arms and an increased incidence of diabetes in the selenium arms. So the study was stopped. So what comes out in the press release is, Dr. So-and-so has found that there's an increased risk of cancer or decreased risk of cancer with such and such, has to be put to the scientific test, because it may not be true. So have to be careful. Vitamins, minerals, all these things, my attitude and what I advise my patients is everything in moderation. Okay, don't go crazy over, mega vitamins and all that, because you just don't know, and they interact with all kinds of things. So everything in moderation. There's nothing wrong, The good Lord put out all this good food on the earth for us to eat. So let's eat the good food that's here and not be crazy about it.
Thank you.
We had an email question.
And the question is prostate cancer hereditary? And does it have any hereditary components?
Okay, that's, we're closing in on some genes that are probably linked to the 9th chromosome that are involved in a hereditary form of prostate cancer. But like breast cancer, a very small number of cancers are probably hereditary. It's probably in the 2 to 4% range of all of them. Okay? However, there is a familial factor, and it may be because you're exposed to the same environment, the same diets, we're not sure. But if you have a first-degree relative, your risk definitely goes up. So a father increases your risk by 2 times. If you have a brother with prostate cancer, it's like 3 or 4 times increased risk. And it's cumulative. So the more first-degree relatives you have, the higher your risk of developing prostate cancer. Okay? But is it a purely genetic basis? That is probably a small percentage. So people, we talk about the breast cancer genes. Well, it's not a lot of women who have positive breast cancer genes and breast cancer. It's a small percentage. But there sure are a lot of women with breast cancer. And so there are so many other factors involved. That's a good question.
Related
Yes,
to
sir.
that question, could you briefly comment on the recent research covering the human genome, the basic structure, and I think they've been doing some research on prostate cancer.
Oh gosh, yes. There's a ton of research going on. Think about if you had a big lake full of fish and you drained all the water out of the lake. So now you've seen all the fish are there. Now you got to figure out one at a time what they are. It's the same thing. We've sort of been able to identify the genome, so we know all of the entire genome, what the blueprint of the body is. But now we got to figure out what all of these genes do. A lot of them don't do anything. There's a lot of junk in our chromosomes. There's a lot of stuff that is very important. So from a prostate cancer point of view, the holy grail in prostate cancer right now is to be able to identify which prostate cancers need treatment and which can be watched or aren't urgent for treatment. Because, and this is a very interesting, can I take a minute to explain this about prostate cancer? Prostate cancer comes in all shapes and sizes. And if I can use the analogy to a barnyard. If you walk into a barnyard and there's a turtle, a bunny rabbit, and a bird, you'll startle them all. The bird will start to fly away. Now, if you're really good with a bow and arrow or a gun or you got a net or something, you'll catch some of the birds. But many of them will be off and gone before you can catch them. The other end, you've got the turtle. It'll stick its head out of its shell and look at you and maybe start to move around. And maybe one day, if it's close enough to the edge of the barnyard, of the yard and the fence, will find its way out. Or it might turn into a bunny rabbit, which is going to hop around and pretty soon get out of the barnyard. So if you think of cancer in that analogy, that it's in your prostate or in your breast or in your colon, and you don't want it to get out of that organ to other parts of the body because that's when it can kill you, then these cancers all behave differently. And why do they behave differently? Because they're not made up of the same blueprint. They all have different genetics. So some cancers are genetically inclined to act like turtles. They're going to grow very slowly. Under the microscope, they look like a cancer, and we have to call them cancer. I wish we could call them something else. Maybe we should call them turtles. But they act very differently from a bird, which is going to metastasize or spread to other parts of the body and become deadly. And it's all the genetics. So to answer your question, we are trying in many labs around the world, including ours. We just recruited, by the way, a leading genomicist from UC San Francisco to join. We're very pleased. He's a senior scientist, just joined our team. And he brought 2 younger scientists with him to investigate things like what are the genetic differences between a turtle, a bunny rabbit, and a bird type of a prostate cancer? And can we identify up front, just from a biopsy, even better one day from a blood test or a sputum test or a urine test, can we identify whether or not a man has a type of a cancer that really needs to be treated urgently or can be treated, within the next year or 2 or 3 before it turns into a bird, because these things do change. Or whether or not that individual already has a bird in place, in which case we got to be very aggressive to have a chance at curing him. So that research is ongoing, and that, to me, that's the holy grail. Once we get there, then that will make my job a lot easier, because I'll be able to just send off, say, tell me what to do. What are the genetics of this cancer? Is it going to grow fast? Can we reassure the individual that, there's smoke but no fire?
So in the long run, looking at the big picture, the solution wouldn't be surgery or radiation. In the long run, I'm talking 10, 20 years down the road, probably the solution is at this level of genetics.
No, this is the prognostic stage. So the first thing is diagnostic. Do you have cancer? And right now, the only way we know if there's cancer is by doing a biopsy, sticking a needle into the prostate and getting a little bit of tissue to look at under the microscope. We're working on diagnostics to see if maybe one day we'll have a form of imaging that will show us the inside of the prostate so well that we don't need to biopsy it anymore. So that's another goal, and we're not really very close to that yet. With breast screening and breast diagnostics, you have mammography, you have ultrasound, you have MRI, you can see the inside of the breast. The breast is a little easier to access than the prostate. But even with those diagnostics, you can't be sure until you biopsy the breast to know what it is. And in breast cancer as well, you need to know, is it an aggressive one or a slow-growing type? Breast cancers have turtles, bunny rabbits, and birds too. In fact, that analogy was created by a breast cancer specialist many years ago. I just borrowed it for prostate because it works the same way. So, we got to perfect our diagnostics. Then we got to do our prognostics, meaning what's going to happen to this individual? The crystal ball part of medicine. Once we have a crystal ball, then that will steer us towards the treatment options. So the treatment option may be what we call active surveillance, which means doing nothing basically except watching closely for that turtle to turn into a bunny rabbit and then acting. Or it might mean we need to treat. So we might need to operate. We might need to use radiation. There are other forms of therapy that are around. And for the very lowest stages of cancer and the earliest risks, maybe one day we'll have something called focal therapy. Some people are referring to it as the male lumpectomy. Taking just a lump out of her breast. We used to take a whole breast. When a woman had breast cancer, she'd have a mastectomy, removing the entire breast, and that was excessive. It wasn't necessary. It was learned 20 years ago that if you just took out the cancer and radiated the area, you had the same cure rates. So we're able to preserve a lot of women's breast. So, we're not doing that with prostate cancer yet because we can't identify where that lump is. So again, once we have the better methodology to actually see inside the prostate, one day we might be able to say, okay, this prostate's got 4 little lumps in it, and inject a drug into those 4 lumps. And that's it, go home. You're fixed. Right now we can't do that. So that's futuristic as well. And, hopefully in my lifetime we'll be there. We're doing that research here as well. A big group in Toronto is doing a lot of work on that. They're doing some really nice work on that.
Just if you could talk about the Vancouver Prostate Center, what's the sort of shape of it, the structure, how does it affiliate with the other centers of excellence, and maybe talk about the resources that are going into it and that are needed to...
So the Vancouver Prostate Center was created formally in 1998. And we've been doing prostate research in Vancouver since 1979. Two researchers from Edmonton, originally Toronto, Dr. Rennie, Paul Rennie, and Dr. Nick Prokofsky, started doing prostate research here in Vancouver back then. World authorities in the field. They did a lot of work. They worked at the Cancer Agency. I joined them in 1983, and Dr. Gleave joined the group in 1991. And in 1993, I moved from St. Paul's to VGH to sort of take on the task of growing the Vancouver Prostate Center. At the time, it was called the Prostate Center of Vancouver General, VGH. But it's the Vancouver Prostate Center at UBC, VGH right now. And between 93 and 98, we managed to raise a lot of money from both the private sector and the federal government to move into a larger facility called the Jack Bell at VGH. It's that building at Oak and 10th. And start to recruit more scientists and a lot more staff. And it's grown from that point to now where we have 20 scientists and about 135 people working. The new building going up next to it, if you know the area right on Laurel next to the Jack Bell, there's a brand new research building. 3 floors of that will be for prostate research. And once we've occupied that, we'll have probably the largest prostate research center in the world here in Vancouver. Not probably, we will. There isn't a center anywhere. UCLA is large, but they're not. Michigan, Johns Hopkins. You know, so it's pretty exclusive territory. Now, to support that needs a lot of funding. And our biggest challenge is sustainability. We've built this machine, churning out great science, well known around the world. And a big task is because it's not revenue generating, we need to raise the funds. So we look to our provincial and federal governments, raising grants, you know, and philanthropy to try to keep the place going. That's my job, keep the place going. And it's a lot of work. But at the same time, we're growing because we have to grow. There's just too much need. And we're being very productive. So, you know, we're one of 11 centers of excellence that are Senate sanctioned at UBC. So we're a UBC Center of Excellence. So our executive reports directly to our Dean of Medicine and through him to the President of the university. We're a big player. I'm very proud, and Vancouverites should, you know, British Columbians should be very proud that we have this facility here. Well, we're just about out of time, I think. Yeah.
Just about at the end of the summary, do you have anything to add before we wrap up?
Thank you for coming. No, I love talking about the men's health. I love talking about the research that we've done. Very proud of all the stuff that UBC has done. And we not only work with UBC. I mean, we're like the hub of a spider web, and we're networked right across the country and across the world. We're very tight with Australia, groups in the UK, across the United States, and across Europe. So, you know, we've got it's a very strong group that we have here, and hopefully we'll come up with the Holy Grail one day out of Vancouver. And thanks again. Appreciate your questions and your being here.
Well, I want to thank everyone for attending, and also to anyone who's watching our live webcast at home. I would also like to thank the UBC Media Group for making this webcast available for everyone across the province. And we also have a second seminar for our health series that will be on men's health as well. And it will have a special focus on the health of immigrant men from South Asia. It's going to take place on May 14th at the Surrey Public Library with Dr. John Goldenberg. And there will be another live webcast that will be up and running, so make sure to mark that event on your calendar if it's interesting. And let's give a big thanks to Dr. Goldenberg.